Hey, it's Tyler from Rehab to Fab Designs, and today I'm going to be showing you a start to finish makeover on these two cherry nightstands. And as embarrassed as I am to admit, I always speak the truth. They're actually a part of a set for my oldest son that we did in spring of 2022, guys. And that's how late I am on finishing them, but hey, hashtag life. So 2.5 years later, and without further ado, let's get started. Now these nightstands had a factory finish on them, and it was pretty shiny, as you can see here in the reflection. And typically I would start by scuff sanding my pieces. However, for these I knew I was going to be doing a textured finish, so they match the original dresser. And for that I don't need to do scuff sanding because the texture additive I'm going to add is going to keep my finish strong. Because of that, I am just starting by cleaning these. For that, I'm using a chemical degreasing agent that is produced by Dixie Belle called White Lightning. White Lightning comes in a granule form in a container, and you simply mix it with warm water, and you can put it in a spray bottle and then use it to spray right on your pieces, and then clean with a paper towel or a soft lint-free cloth. And you're going to continue doing this until your piece is nice and clean. Once my nightstands were clean, it was time to start my foundation. As I mentioned, I'm going to do a textured finish on this, so I'm going to be starting with a base color of Caviar, which is Dixie Belle's black, and I'm going to be using their Sea Spray texture additive to put directly into my paint jar. We're going to mix this up and get it nice and thick, kind of a brownie consistency, and then we're going to use that to put on my piece to create that first layer of texture to give us an overall grungy kind of finish. As you can see here, I had about a half of jar of paint left in this container, and I used 2 big full scoops of Sea Spray to put right into the container to get a nice thick consistency. You're going to want to mix it thoroughly so that you no longer see any white powder on top, but keeping in mind that this is going to be very chunky. To apply it, I'm going to be using a natural bristle chip brush. You can pick these up from Dixie Belle. Now, textured finishes are created using 2 things. One is a product, and for this, again, I'm using Sea Spray texture additive to put directly into my paint. And 2 is your technique. For the technique, I am simply stippling my paint on. And if you don't know what that means, it's basically just pouncing your paintbrush up and down. And what this does is creates peaks and valleys, or high spots and low spots in your paint and your texture to give you a nice rough finish. It's also going to create a very durable base for our paint to go on, which is basically going to make a very durable finish. Apply 1 coat over the entire piece. I'm going to be purchasing new hardware for these nightstands because these, I don't know, 1990s style drawer pulls are just really dated to me. Now, sometimes I will paint directly over these and leave them as is, but for these I'm going to be buying new. And so because of that, I am going to remove all the hardware, and we are going to fill in the old holes because it never fails. Anytime I swap out my hardware, the holes never fit the new hardware size, so I always have to fill in the holes and start new. So for that, we are going to be using Dixie Belle Mud. And while you would typically apply this using a putty knife because it's a moisture consistency, mud is supposed to be stored in the refrigerator, but I accidentally left this one outside in my shop, and because of that it's a little bit drier. So all I'm doing is taking little pinches of the mud directly out of the container, and then I'm kind of rolling it up into a little ball and then shoving it down into the old existing hardware holes. Oh, and I forgot to show, I typically take a piece of blue painter's tape and put tape on the back side of the holes, so inside the drawer. And what this does is keeps your putty from going through the hole and falling off into the back of the drawer. So put a piece of tape on it first, and then just use your putty to fill in those holes. Make sure you put enough of your mud to kind of overfill the hole, so you don't want it to be completely flush. You want to overfill it, and then you're going to come back using your putty knife and scrape over the top of it to get it nice and smooth. Once the mud is dry, you're going to sand over top of the holes just to knock off any excess. Then wipe it back to clean up any dust. Luckily for me, I almost always take pictures of the paint colors I'm using along with my piece. When I've finished a design, this allows me to be able to go back at any time and see what colors I used. And since I waited, again, 2.5 years to do these nightstands to match the dresser, that was a really good thing because I probably would not have remembered it correctly. Now, I did also use a purple color originally on the dresser, but I decided to leave that out for these because it didn't show up very much in my finish. So what I ended up going with was in the navy, which is a navy blue color by Dixie Belle, Driftwood, which is the light gray that you see there, and then also Antebellum blue. And I'm just going to be randomly applying these all over the dresser, working on the front, each side, and then the top and smaller sections. To apply my paint, I'm using Dixie Belle synthetic brushes, and I have a total of 2. So I'm using one brush for my in the navy and also for the Antebellum because they're both darker colors, and I'm going to be blending them, so it doesn't really matter if I contaminate them. And then I'm using a second brush for my lighter color, which is the Driftwood. My method is basically to apply some in the navy, add a little bit of the Driftwood so I have a nice highlight, and then add the Antebellum blue. And then I'm using the brush that I use for my darker paints to just blend all over it. And then I'll just add the in the navy around those colors again, just to blend it all in to get one nice, even, smooth blend. Remember, there's no wrong way to blend paint. You're basically just trying to add a couple of different colors and then mix them all together to get a nice outcome. So when I'm blending, I make sure and use different directions with my paintbrush, meaning that I will paint horizontally, vertically, and diagonally. And all this does is make sure your paint is nice and mixed and you get a smoother look overall. After applying just one coat of my paint colors, it's time to seal it because remember, we have a nice base of our darker color to start with. So one coat of your colors is actually all we need. To seal this piece, I'm using clear coat from Dixie Belle. My go-to is flat because I like a nice flat sheen. And I again am using a synthetic brush from Dixie Belle to apply that. I'm going to simply dip it right into my container and then apply it nice and smooth using long strokes from one side to the other. And then we are going to do a total of 2 coats to make sure we have good protection of this finish. Next up, it's time to give this piece a major update by changing out the hardware. It's crazy how something as simple as this can make such a huge impact on an overall design. This is a cabinet hardware jig that my husband ordered. I believe we picked it up off Amazon, and if so, you should be able to find it in the links for my page. But it basically helps you line up where your holes are going to be so that you make sure that they're evenly spaced and in the correct spot. I usually eyeball it, but I must say this thing gives you perfect holes every time. Lastly, I decided to embellish the drawers a little bit by putting a stencil design on them. Now keep in mind this is for my teenage son, and so I can't do anything too girly. So because of that, I'm going to use a stencil from Dixie Belle called Don't Be Square. And as you can see in the video, I'm going to be using Dixie Belle's roller kit to apply the paint over my stencil. This little kit's nice. It comes with a tray and a roller and a foam brush, and you can put some saran wrap over it if you want, and that way you can reuse your plastic tray multiple times. Now the trick to not having bleed through when you're using a stencil is to make sure you don't put too much paint on your stencil. So to prevent that, I like to use a piece of cardboard or an old box, or you could even use a towel if you wanted, to offload some of the excess paint once you've picked it up on your roller. You simply use the roller and roll it several times over your object. I use a piece of cardboard, and this will get the extra paint off, and then you're ready to stencil. when it's possible, I like to use an extra set of hands to hold my stencil down just to make sure it doesn't move. If you don't have that ability, you can always use tape to tape it in place to keep it from moving around while you're rolling your paint on. And that's it on the tutorial for these two nightstands, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please be sure and follow along with Rehab to Fab Designs as well as the Dixie Belle channel. Be sure and turn on notifications, like, follow, and comment.